So as we are approaching the end of the new year, it means it is once again a good time to look at all of the available options as you address your reporting needs within Service. There are a lot of different types of reports that you may choose to run depending on your organizational needs or potentially things like grant writing. Those could be as simple as selecting a date range and clicking Run Report, or they might be more involved if you're looking for particular pieces of information. But we'll explore all the different types of reports available today, how you can customize those to pull the information you're looking for, and the different ways that Service can meet the needs that you have. A good place to start with this is a couple definitions just to make sure we're all on the same page. As we talk about reporting in Service, generally that's going to be any type of document or printout that you create that will give you hours information. There are a couple other terms you might think of when you talk about reporting, one being a data export. So in Service, if you'd like to pull information like your volunteer data or your opportunity information, there are some tools to do data exports. For example, if we go into the volunteer database under volunteer management, from here we can search for a set of individuals, select those people, and then in the dropdown, you can print out or download a volunteer spreadsheet. I would consider this more of a data export rather than a report, although there are some things in here like lifetime volunteer hours that you can include. So just to kind of we're splitting hairs a little bit, but data export versus reporting, we're going to be kind of focusing more on the reporting side of things today. That said, of course, if you have questions related to data exporting, please go ahead and ask those. One other kind of definition that's useful to kind of set the groundwork for is running searches. Sometimes you might think of, well, I want a report of how many volunteers served last year, and what you're really looking for is just that number. Or maybe what you're really looking for is to communicate with those people. A lot of times what you might think of as a report may actually just be a search. For example, if we go into the advanced volunteer search under volunteer management, we can run a report for things like under account status options. Let's see everyone who made a profile this year. Right? So we could go in here and run a search for everyone whose account start date falls between January 1st of this year and today. And then we could use that as a basis for sending an email or perhaps then running a report later. But sometimes what you're looking for is a search that you might then use to engage the database, or maybe I just wanted to run that search and just get that number directly. That's also an option when you run some searches. So we're going to be pulling in a lot of these searches as we look at some more kind of complex ways to run reports and finding particular sets of information. But I did want to clarify that sort of definition as well. So let's talk about a couple kind of simple or quick and easy reports that you could run if you're looking to just quickly get your totals for the year. A lot of times when we talk about end of year reporting, perhaps what you need is just your grand totals. How many volunteers came through the doors? How many times did my volunteers come through the doors? And how many hours did they serve as a whole? So if we go under the volunteer management heading into report management, which is where we're going to spend a good chunk of our time here today, there are a number of reports here that you might consider just kind of quick exports. For example, you go to the top of the page, you set a date range. The default for this, incidentally, is the previous month. So you'll see today's date as the end date and 1 month prior as the start date. Of course, you can modify that. So if you want to go and do like year to date or a specific quarter or maybe the last full calendar year or whatever you're looking for, right? You can set your date range here. And then there are a number of reports here that you can just click Run Report and get those grand totals. So, for example, a lot of these reports have titles that kind of allude to what is the major subject of this report or kind of the hierarchy of the report. The second one here, event or project participation, this gives you your totals by event. All right, so you would see, this event happened during that time frame. Here's how many people, here's how many hours. Volunteer participation gives you totals by volunteer name. You can also run reports for an individual group. or maybe a set of groups. You can run reports by interest categories. And then there's also a yearly participation summary. We'll talk about this one more in a moment. But a lot of these are designed to be pretty quick. If I just want a grand total, all my volunteers, I don't really care about the event names themselves. I just want totals. I could use this volunteer participation report. Don't really need to change anything. Click Run Report, and then that will give me essentially a Word document that shows me those totals. So if we pull this across here, obviously this is my demo console. It's all fictitious information. But down at the bottom, you can see we get totals for the individuals, and then at the very bottom of the report, a grand total for that time frame. So if you're just looking for quick numbers, there are a lot of reports like this that you can just set a date range and click Run Report, depending on the flavor you're looking for, right? This was the volunteer participation report. So obviously we're seeing volunteers here, and we get a total for each individual, and then we get a grand total at the bottom of the report as well. So likewise, you can do that same type of thing for event or project. Maybe you want totals by project name or event name, and then at the bottom, the grand total, or by groups or by interest categories. So it just kind of depends on your flavor in that context. Now, the yearly participation summary does kind of meet that same criteria. This is a quick report. You're getting summaries. This one is going by month. It does not use the date range at the top of the page. Instead, you pick a start month, and then the system will give you 12 months from that month. So if we wanted to say like a fiscal year or something, perhaps our fiscal year starts in August, we can set that as the starting month, pick the starting year, and then it will give us 12 months from that date. There are some other things in here too, these queries. We're going to talk about this more in a little bit. But again, keeping with that idea of a quick and easy report, just giving us a summary, I can leave this low detail if I want to, or I can pick some more information. But if I run this report, it's going to give us, again, another Word document. And now we're getting totals per month. So we can see, in March, we had 19 unique volunteers, 2 different events happened, 44 registrations, and then 121 hours. Let's talk about these totals here that we see obviously in the months and then down at the bottom of these reports as well. So these totals or these numbers reflect different aspects of kind of your participation or your volunteers' participation. Most of these are pretty straightforward, right? How many hours were served during this time frame? So how many hours were served by the volunteers or by any groups that were working with you kind of contributed. Now, I want to clarify something, and that is that service assumes that a volunteer attends a shift for its full duration, unless something happens to disrupt that. So if someone is registered for an event, they will get credit for that unless you mark them as a no-show or they cancel, or perhaps you use the sign-in console and you have people sign in when they get there and sign out when they leave. That will override whatever the default is. But otherwise, service kind of operates from the standpoint that people did participate. We want to give them credit. So if you think this number is inflated, generally that might mean that you need to go and mark some no-shows on your events. Okay, so hours, pretty straightforward. Registrations, you can think of this number as a turnstile. Every time someone participates in an event or records hours for a service project, that will tick this up. Even if it was the same person participating 807 times in my database, this is just reflecting the number of times somebody came through the door. So I would think of this as like a turnstile. Your events is the number of unique opportunities in the database. You might just have one here. If you have like one warehouse sorting event, that's a time slot event. This is just kind of reflecting the different types of opportunities or the different individual opportunities that you have listed. And then volunteers, this number has an asterisk next to it. You can see the note down here, but basically this is the number of unique volunteers in your database. That means service knows all of these people, and all of these people participated in this report. So depending on what type of report you ran, Obviously, this was that yearly participation summary, and I started in August of 2024. So in that 12-month period, I had 220 unique volunteers. That means all of these people have their own profiles. They are not necessarily bulk group registrations. Those don't get totaled in here because we can't assume that those are unique individuals. So these are people who have their own profile in Service. They registered for something, or maybe you registered them on the back end, but they are all unique individuals. So that's true in all of the different reports that you'll see. We looked at the volunteer participation report earlier. If we run a different version, let's look at this interest category participation real quick. This will show you your totals by interest category. So we see, okay, in my admin office category, I had 1 opportunity, 15 unique volunteers, 540 registrations, and 1,600 hours, right? So we get those same numbers represented here. And again, I'm looking at like these quick and dirty reports. This is a low detail version. I just set a date range and click run report. So we see those same totals down at the bottom, same numbers. That is what all of those different things represent. And that should help you kind of understand the numbers that you're getting in there. Now, I want to clarify something about the volunteers number. Sometimes you have, or you might have bulk group registrations, or what you might call bulk anonymous registrations, where I don't know who any of those people are necessarily, but let's say this school is bringing 30 people to an event. Those numbers, those volunteers, they do get counted in your registrations and in your hours. So they will show up in those numbers, and they are getting tallied in all of that information. They don't count towards the unique volunteer number because that's an assumption. It could be 30 unique people from that school that came a couple of times this last year, or it could have been the same 15 people just across multiple different iterations. So Service doesn't make that assumption. If you would like to make that assumption, you can. And just really briefly, you can use the custom participation report. So the first one in this list to say, show me all group activity. Those are those bulk group registrations. And you could say, exclude all of my individual volunteers. And if you run this report, then this will show you all of the bulk group registrations and ignore all of the individual volunteers. So this one will kind of give you that number if you wanted to then assume those are all unique volunteers and add that to your unique volunteer count. Okay, so those are kind of some quick reports you might run. Again, there's a number of different options in here, and it just depends on sort of what flavor you're looking for or what primary focus you might have, whether it's the names of the individuals or the names of the events, your interest categories, a monthly breakdown, or just kind of grand totals. We didn't look at this first report yet. We're going to dig into this one a little bit more now. So your reporting needs for the end of the year might be a little bit more unique. You might need more specific numbers. Maybe I need to look at a specific set of individuals. I want to do some demographics reporting. I have a mandate to report on this set of volunteers because we write a grant based on that set of volunteers participating in this set of opportunities. If you have reporting needs like that, generally those are met by using one of the reports that allow you to apply a query. There are a couple reports that let you do this. So the first one in the list obviously has this. You can see it says custom participation report. It is a spreadsheet only. So this will not be a Word document. If we look at the top of the page here, you might have noticed that there's a format option next to the date range. And this allows you to pick between document and spreadsheet, which generally applies to your reports, but some require one or the other. So this custom participation report is always a spreadsheet, regardless what you've selected here. But what this report allows you to do is to apply queries to filter which volunteers or which opportunities or which groups or maybe even which specific reservation codes were used to complete certain registrations. So these queries allow you to drill down into your database and say, I don't want to look at everything. I want to look at a specific set of my data. So what we can do is go into the volunteer database or go into the opportunity database and run a search. You can also use groups and you can also use reservations. We can talk more about that in a minute. But if we go to volunteers, let's say, if we want to run like a simple demographics report, I can say, let's run an advanced volunteer search. I'm going to use, in this case, age. So we can say, show me all the volunteers that are over 18, right? So we can put a start age and an end age. If we run this search, yes, I see those individuals in my database and I get a number down here. Maybe that's all I needed. I could then go and run a report or maybe send an email, or maybe I'm just looking for the number, right? But let's say I want to actually view the hours served by all my volunteers 18 and up. Then I can go and run that search. And now if I go back into report management, I can use this query to say, don't show me all the volunteers, which is the default. Instead, use my previous volunteer search. So only the people that I just searched for will show up in this report. Again, I can select to include or exclude bulk group activity, just kind of depends on what you're looking for. I could do the same sort of thing on the opportunity database side. I could go and search for a specific set of opportunities. Maybe I want to view all my volunteers over 18 who participated in all of my events in a certain category, right? So I could go and run a search for all the events in that category or all the events with a certain tag or however you want to do that, and then come back in here and say, use my previous search. So we can look at that more in a moment. But if we use this query, I'm not looking at my whole database now. I'm only looking at a certain set of volunteers. And then the other thing this report allows you to do is to select exactly how much data to include. So if I want to add columns to this spreadsheet, I can just go through and select as much or as little information as I'd like to include. So maybe I want age and gender. Maybe I want to have the volunteer's email address. Maybe I need some information like background check status or whatever, right? I can select as many columns as I want to include in here, and then those will basically just get added as columns to the report. This report in particular has a couple detail levels and then a group by option. A lot of the reports have a detail level. And generally speaking, what you're doing when you select low versus high detail, or sometimes these have a medium detail as well, you're just choosing to kind of expound on the report. If I do a low detail report, it's going to be like a summary, right? And if I'm grouping by volunteer in this case, it's going to be a summary by volunteer. So I just get a total for each person during this time frame. If I instead say high detail, now I'm seeing every single registration as its own row in this report. So that's kind of generally speaking what the detail levels do. But if we do a low detail level, group by volunteer, let's go ahead and run this report. And remember, I searched for only those who are over 18. So this will give us basically just a summary for each person. Again, it's a plain spreadsheet in this case, so it's kind of easy to engage with if you want to do like a mail merge off the back of this or something else. But you can see all the columns that I selected to include are here, and then I can also see a total for each person. So every person in this report, I see like a total registration count, again, that turnstile idea, and then their total hours served, which is the sum of all of the times that they participated. So we get a row per person because we chose low detail. And then if we scroll to the bottom of this report, we also get our grand totals, right? So the number of unique volunteers, opportunities, registrations, and hours. So in this case, I searched for, again, only volunteers who are 18 and up. Perhaps I want to just kind of pull all my volunteers and then sort by this column. That's definitely an option. Basically, just make sure you include whatever columns you want to sort by, and then you can choose to say, show me all volunteers that participated in this time frame. So this report is really flexible in terms of creating different sets. You know, you can go and run a search for whatever set of volunteers you want to include, and then, you know, basically choose to include as much or as little information in the report as you want to. A couple things I want to point out about this type of report and some good use cases for this. If we go back into the advanced volunteer search, We can, if we'd like to, use things like participation options. Now, we're kind of looking at participation because we're running a report to see how many hours did you serve this year or whatever time frame we're looking at. But maybe I want to say, hey, of my volunteers that did participate last year, how many of them came back and how many hours did they serve this year, right? So I could use this search, this participation options, to say, show me people with more than 0 time served, i.e. they came in at least one time in 2024. So we set our date range here for January 1st, 2024 to December 31st, 2024. How many of these people who participated at least one time last year? So we run that search. Then we go back into report management and we look at, again, this report that we're running now is this year. So they participated in 2025. And if we run this search, we do previous volunteer search, run the report, this will only show us people who have registrations in 2024 and 2025, just kind of by the nature of what this report is showing us and by the search that we ran to look at only people who participated last year. So it's a pretty common use case for this report. If you want to get an idea of like how many returning volunteers you have, how many hours they served, that type of thing, you can run a search by participation last year or within a certain period. Maybe I want to see all the people that served more than 10 hours or less than 5 hours, thinking about like data retention or volunteer retention, that kind of stuff. You can use those queries to tune what you're looking at in this report and then get some ideas of general trends. Now, along this idea of volunteer retention, and this is a bit of a sidestep, but there is a report on this page specifically for retention. If we scroll down, number 7 is this volunteer retention report. It doesn't use the date range. Instead, you basically just run it. Now, you can apply a query. So if you only want to look at a specific set of volunteers or perhaps a specific set of opportunities, like I want to find all my volunteers who work in the warehouse and how much they come back, right? You could run a report or run a search for a specific set of opportunities. But if we run this report, by kind of the default, the all volunteers, all opportunities, this will show us all of the volunteers added in a calendar year and then the percentage that came back in each subsequent year. Now my demo console is a little bit wonky, but yours will show all of the volunteers who were active in a particular calendar year. And then of that set, what percentage came back the subsequent year or 2 years later or 3 years later or 4 years later. So this obviously will show you up to 5 different years, and then you get a cumulative retention as well. So this can be really interesting to just view kind of the trend or the life cycle of your volunteers in terms of how long do they stick with you and how many people come back year over year, kind of that trend. Okay, so a few other kind of important things regarding these more maybe complex searches and reports that you might run. This custom participation report does have the option to save parameters. So if you regularly run a search and a report for a specific set of volunteers and you like the format that you've created, maybe you do like a monthly report that looks at the same things and you'd want to be able to quickly rerun that, you don't necessarily always have to go and rerun those queries and reselect everything. What you can do is run your searches, maybe use a saved search, make all your selections, and then get all your settings configured. So what detail level, how do you want to group this? And then you can actually save the report parameters here. So if you run or want to run the same report on a regular basis, you can create kind of a template for yourself. Click on Save Report Parameters, give it a title. You can make this private or shared. Private means only admin and the person who made this can use it. Shared would allow leadership team or group leaders to use this same report. Group leaders can only run reports for their group members, so they kind of have another filter applied on top of that. But you can save a report here or save the parameters, and then when you want to reuse it, click on Load Saved Report Parameters. When you select a report here, it will kind of rerun whatever queries you had run select all the things you had chosen, pick your detail level, your group by, and then you just need to set a date range and run the report. If you find that later you need to tune this and maybe make some slight changes, you can, go and select additional things or deselect things, and then go in here and actually click on replace saved report parameters and kind of overwrite an existing report with maybe an updated change to what you're selecting or including. So as far as end of year reporting and kind of common ways to approach that, if you have specific things that you're looking for and you need to tune this to show a certain set of volunteers or opportunities, or you want to include certain pieces of info, I would certainly encourage you to save those parameters after you get that all nailed down, so that in the future, it's just a matter of loading a saved report and then setting a date range and running it. All right. So I just want to address a quick question that came in regarding searching and reports. So the question was asked if inactive volunteers get included in reports. So you might see some language on this page: active, all, inactive, or when you're thinking about volunteers, the active versus inactive status on volunteer accounts. That is really more of a marker for you. It does not inherently dictate whether or not volunteers show up in a report. If you select to, as your queries for this custom participation report, to view all volunteers and all opportunities, that is inclusive. You will see everyone in the database and everything that has happened, right? If you run this first report, custom participation, and you say all volunteers, include group activity, all opportunities, all registrations, this report will show you absolutely everything that happened in this time frame. So it's kind of ignoring whether someone's active or inactive, or whether your opportunities are open, closed, or even archived. So the system is not kind of looking for any queries in that case. If, however, you run a search for a certain set of volunteers, right? Earlier, I gave the example of finding volunteers who are 18 and up. If we go in and run an advanced search using age, and we say, show me all the volunteers who are 18 and up, well, this query, by default, is only looking at this parameter. When you run an advanced search on this page, anything you leave blank will be ignored. So there is actually, under account status options, the option to search for active versus inactive volunteers. But if I don't have anything selected here, it will include both. I could, if I'd like to, exclude inactive volunteers and only search for active volunteers, which would again be the people that you have marked as active. But by default, if you run a search in here and you don't select anything in that active versus inactive, it will include both. So this is also true in the opportunity database. So I want to point out, if we go into search and manage existing opportunities, on this page, you can view, by default, open opportunities. You can click to view closed opportunities. You can search for opportunities by name. And there's also an advanced search if you want to search for opportunities using other criteria, like what interest category it's a part of, if it has a certain tag or a keyword, which searches all sorts of parts of the event. So you can search for like a set of events. You can explicitly include or exclude archived opportunities. Just as a reminder, the system by default will archive opportunities after 5 years. So normally when you're talking about running like end of year reports, these are, not really a part of that because the archived events are older than that. But if you want to be pedantic and search for a specific set of events and include everything that could possibly have happened, then you could deselect everything here or select everything here, right? Or maybe choose to include archived opportunities if you want to look further back than 5 years ago. So, but as a reminder, most of these reports, unless you are running a query that excludes a certain set of volunteers or opportunities, If you say all volunteers, all opportunities, or if you run one of these quick reports we looked at earlier, by default, these are showing you everything that happened in that time frame, unless you apply some kind of filter because you only want to look at a certain set. So I do want to point out these query options exist obviously in this first report type. This is probably the most robust report and one you might want to use on a more regular basis because you can save these parameters. But you can use these same queries or a lot of these same query options in a couple other reports. So if we go down and look at your yearly participation summary, this has those same query options. Same thing with the retention report. And then you can also use this for this checklist report. I would think of this a little bit more as like a data export. You're kind of checking on statuses of checklists and that sort of thing through here. This one isn't necessarily giving you hours because it doesn't use the date range on this page either. But there are a couple other places where you can apply those queries if you need to tune some of the reports or exports that you're doing. Okay. Now I do want to mention some reporting that your volunteers have access to as well. If you want to view a report for an individual, you probably noticed if you were looking at that or kind of eagle-eyed on this report management page, you can just input somebody's name in this volunteer participation report. You could search for an individual by name, and this will apply the query kind of automatically. And then when you run the report, it's only going to show you people that match that, right? So you can do that kind of through this page, but you might have cases where people have a similar name or even the same name. So you can also do that through a volunteer's profile. If I'm just looking for one individual, I can go to that one person's account. I can click to view their registrations. And from there, I can select events within a date range. By default, this shows you last year into next year. So maybe I want to narrow this. Again, maybe I'm looking at like year to date kind of stuff. So I could narrow those results, select those options. Just bear in mind, this can actually forecast as well. So if you select registrations that are in the future, you could see those as a part of the report as well. But on this page, you can print a summary as a PDF or as a Word document. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a summary of this person's registrations in that time frame. So it's basically just that report. The PDF version of this report is also something your volunteers can produce themselves. So if we look at this report, you can see this has letterhead at the top of the page. Obviously, we're utilizing the demonstration console here. Your system will have its own option. If you're not sure what this is or how to edit that, just submit a ticket to our customer support team. If you want to view what letterhead you have in there right now, that's in the system configuration under system appearance. So then you have in here logos and then this PDF activity summary header logo. So I typically recommend using letterhead, but of course it could just be your logo as well. If you want to change that, submit a ticket to our customer support team. But you can see this document, again, it has that letterhead, it has the person's name, when was the report run, and then everything we had selected, right? So we see all those registrations in here. If any of these registrations are either ongoing or scheduled, that'll be noted, and those do not count towards the total at the bottom because they have not yet occurred. So we're not going to give someone credit for something that hasn't already happened. This report is something that volunteers can print themselves as well. And if they do print this report, maybe they're turning it in at school or work or, something along those lines, then the person they turn it into can use this verification tool at the bottom to produce a verified copy of this report. This verified copy, they can just go to that link and type in this code, or they can scan this QR code, and that will allow them to print out basically a verified copy of this report. So again, you can produce this on a volunteer's account, but they can also produce it themselves. You don't necessarily have to do that for them. If we look at the volunteer perspective here, so I'm going to use my profile, use this profile icon to switch to view the system as a volunteer. From here, there is a menu item to view or print activity history. And in here, a volunteer can set a date range, select their registrations, And then down at the bottom, either print the report, which would just immediately download that PDF, or email it to themselves. That would go to their email on file, and it is that exact same PDF. And so again, they could go and like turn that into someone else. I mentioned at the top that we have some YouTube videos, tutorials that are intended for volunteers. One of those videos is exactly that process. How do they print their activity history? So if you're interested in sharing that with volunteers, obviously feel free to do so. It's a short 2-minute video. It basically just tells them how to print that report. Okay. There's just a couple other features related to reporting that I wanted to make sure to point out in case there's some specifics that you need. And of course, feel free to continue asking questions. But one of those things that I wanted to mention is that Service does allow you to track the source of a registration. So for example, perhaps you are doing a Facebook ad for an event to try to recruit more volunteers, or maybe you wanted to print out flyers and post them in different locations and track how successful those were in recruiting volunteers. You can use something called source tracking to identify how a volunteer registered for an event. So let me show you an example of this and then show you kind of where that gets pulled in reports. Every opportunity in the database has an option to send out a private invite or to direct people to a direct registration page. You can also amend those links. So if we look at any event here, if I click on the name of it, that will take us to sort of like the main menu. In here, there's a direct opportunity link, and we can grab that link. There's a couple different versions. They both basically do the same thing. If we grab this long form link, I'm going to copy that out. You can add to the end of one of these links. So if we just go to this link right now, you can see it's just the registration page for this event. But if we want to, we can add to the end of this ampersand source equals, and let's just say this is a school flyer that I'm going to post. So I'll call this source school flyer. Maybe I would use the actual name of the school, right? But what this does is this link is the same page. It's just basically allowing people to see the event. But what I can do with that is I could turn this into a QR code, and I could put that out on a flyer and put it up at that school. And then the system will actually track who used this link to register for this event. So you could run a report that will tell you how many people signed up using this particular link. And you could have multiple versions of this kind of link. You can create all kinds of different sources. Let me show you real quick. So if we copy this URL, and if you paste a URL into the search bar on the main dashboard, the system will allow you to generate a QR code using that. And we could copy this out and then again, just put that on a flyer. So if someone scans this QR code and then they sign up for that event, it will identify that they registered using that school flyer source code that I created. And then when you run reports, so if we go back into report management and we look at this custom participation report, one of the things you can include in this report in the high detail section, so in the opportunity field options, you can include a registration source. Now there are a couple default sources here that you will normally see. You'll see direct, which means the volunteer just logged in and registered for the event, not using a special source link. You will also see admin if someone on the back end registered a volunteer for an event. And you'll also sometimes see walk-in if you allow walk-in registrations and you're using the sign-in console. So those three things will kind of naturally occur. But if you're using a source tracked link like that school flyer one we just created, then you would also see that. So I would see any person who registered using that link. And maybe I have another version for a different school and I want to track how many people signed up using the different flyers that were posted in different places. So if you really want to get into some nitty gritty with stuff like that, or how well did this ad do, you can create source tracked links like that and then run reports to include that data and view how people registered for different events. If you do have further questions about that, obviously don't hesitate to reach out. It's a bit of a deeper subject, but I wanted to make sure you know that that's an option, especially as you're thinking about running reports and trying to evaluate, what's successful, what's not successful, where should we be spending resources. Okay, well, we covered a lot of different information today as it pertains to end of year reporting, running searches, kind of finding sets of volunteers or sets of opportunities, and then running reports on that set of individuals or that set of opportunities. And then some pretty important definitions as it pertains to, what is a report, first of all, versus running a search and a data export. And then also, once you've run a report, what do those numbers mean? What are unique volunteers in service? What are the registrations and the hours? So as you're thinking about your end of year reporting, if you run into any issues in terms of trying to find a certain set of volunteers or trying to find a certain number, please let us know. We would be happy to help. You can always use the Need Help button at the bottom of the page when you're logged in to submit a ticket, and our customer support team will get back to you right away. So thank you for your time here today. We'll leave this open in case there's any more questions that come through, but we are done running through that, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next webinar.